Okay, kids, today's a very exciting day, okay? We're going to talk about one of the presidential contenders who is actually a very good candidate. His name is Michael Bennet, okay? He is really good. Corporate centrism is great, okay? Whereas ideas and principles are kind of like drugs, they're bad, and you shouldn't have them because they're bad. So today I'd like to explore everything there is to know about Michael Bennet and why he is such a great pick and why corporate centrism is so good. Okay, let's get started, kids. Michael Bennet was born in 1964 in New Delhi, India. His parents are American, so he is an American citizen. I know that once in a while, if an American politician is born overseas, there are people who will question that person's citizenship, but as long as at least one of your parents is a citizen, you are covered. Obviously, a lot of the children of military personnel are born abroad, and this applies also to people whose parents are in the State Department. Michael Bennet is covered by the latter category. His father, as we'll see, was a diplomat, among other things. His mother was a Jewish elementary school librarian whose parents were Holocaust survivors, so that is something of an interesting story. But the real legacy of the Bennet family comes on the paternal side. His paternal grandfather was an economic advisor to FDR. His father, Douglas J. Bennet, was a two-time Assistant Secretary of State. He covered different areas both times. He served under both Carter and then Bill Clinton at a much later date. He served as a college president. That was his last job. He retired in 2015. And he was also the president of NPR. Douglas Bennet died in 2018, actually. He just died this past year. And I would say that, if anything, Douglas J. Bennet is the reason why Michael Bennet is at all relevant. But Michael has done things too in his own right, don't get me wrong, but really Dad's influence was pretty damn important for Michael Bennet's political career. With his father's career being primarily in the State Department, Michael Bennet spent most of his childhood in Washington, D.C. In the second grade, he was held back because he had dyslexia, and actually, if anything, that makes him a little bit more endearing simply because there was an obstacle in life and he managed to overcome it. A lot of children of privilege never face any obstacles, so the fact that he was able to overcome something is something of a selling point. I'm really fishing for things to be positive about when it comes to Mr. Mackey here. He attended St. Albans School, which is a prep academy. That is very standard for a lot of these kids who are born in the privilege. They can't go to public schools with the plebs. They have to go to a prep academy. He went to Wesleyan, which is the alma mater of both his father and his grandfather. He graduated in 1987 with a BA in history. After a 2-year stint as an aide, we'll talk about that later, he went to Yale Law School in 1990. I presume he must have graduated around 1993-ish. And while he was there, he edited the Yale Law Review and earned his JD, becoming a lawyer. So he is kind of parallel to Obama in that sense. Obama, of course, edited the Harvard Law Review, and then Bennet edited the Yale Law Review. So obviously, you should bookend Trump with a Harvard lawyer and then a Yale lawyer. I mean, because of course, right? It's all about getting the Ivy League degrees and high office. That will solve all of our problems. We've never tried that before. Michael Bennet self-describes as someone who has spent a significant amount of time not involved in politics, and he says that he is not a lifelong career politician. However, as I will show by looking at his professional history, the only interlude that he had from politics lasted for all of 6 years. The entire rest of his adult life, he is now in his mid-50s, was spent entirely in politics. While he was in college, he served as a page on Capitol Hill. From 1988 to 1990, i.e. the time between he graduating Wesleyan and going to Yale, he served as an aide to Ohio Governor Dick Celeste. He was a law clerk for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals right after he got out of law school. He became an associate of the D.C. Attorney Lloyd Cutler, who is more or less a Democratic operative, or at least he was. He's dead now. And Lloyd Cutler also served as counsel to Bill Clinton, so this put Michael Bennet basically in the Clinton administration by extension. Later on, he officially joined the Clinton administration as the counsel for the Deputy Attorney General. He decided that he was sick of lawyering in 1997. I guess the opportunities were coming too quickly and too easily, so he decided to do something different. He moved his then fiancée, now wife, to Montana, and then they settled in Colorado after a very brief stint in Montana. By the way, at the time when he left the law and the Clinton administration, that is about the same time that Bill Clinton brought his father in to be Assistant Secretary of State for a second time. When Bennet arrived in Colorado, the pace of change in his career slowed down, and he really got focused and made a name for himself in his own right. In Denver, he went on to serve as the managing director of the Anschutz Corporation. This is a company run by a guy whose last name is Anschutz. Anschutz is a major Republican donor. I've seen him described as a mega donor. I don't know exactly what the numbers are in his case, but apparently they are quite significant. While he was there, Michael Bennet, who almost certainly was hired because of his name and family connections, oversaw the formation of Regal Entertainment Group. That, of course, is a movie theater chain that you can find pretty much anywhere in America. It was formed with, I think, the coalescence of around 3 different chains that had existed before that. And he also helped to oversee the rehauling of an oil company. I don't know which one. Anyway, while he was there, he was pretty successful. He made a good deal of money. His net worth is $15 million, which makes him the 3rd richest of the Democratic candidates, according to one calculation I've heard, although that calculation did not include Andrew Yang. I'm pretty sure that Yang is actually worth more than Bennet, but of course one of the media's tactics this cycle has been to pretend that Yang doesn't exist or that his first name is John. Anyhow, let's move on from that. Later on, he left Anschutz Corporation and decided to embrace his family's heritage and go into politics. In this sense, he is kind of like Beto O'Rourke. When he was nearing around 40 years old, he decided that he could no longer ignore the call of his family, so he entered politics. He became the chief of staff to Denver Mayor John Hickenlooper, who also came from the business world originally. Also, I guess Hickenlooper was in geology, then in brew pubs, and then in politics. He served as chief of staff from 2003 to 2005. Then, using his connections in Denver, he was appointed to be the superintendent of Denver Public Schools. And despite having literally no background in this whatsoever, he actually had a very successful tenure and made improvements across the board in Denver schools. It seems that his model for reforming the schools has been followed ever since his departure, and that Denver has continued to make strides, so that is actually most likely the shining achievement in his career thus far. As a general rule in life, I am not a big fan of judging people too much by the company that they keep. To a certain extent, the company you keep is very dependent on where you were born, what family you were born into, etc. So I try not to judge people by the family that they're a part of unless they actively partake in their family's activities. However, I do think it is completely fair to judge politicians by the company that they keep, the people who are closest to them, their mentors, their allies. And before we move too much further into Michael Bennet's career when he actually enters the Senate, I would first like to explore the kind of people that he's associated with. There's a little bit of a variety here, but I think that the overall trend is that he associates with neoliberals. So there is about a 99.9% chance that Michael Bennet himself is either a neoliberal or someone who is way too friendly with neoliberals. So first of all, he worked in the Clinton administration's Justice Department. He was a young lawyer. I wouldn't make too much of that. That being said, Clinton was clearly the bringer of neoliberalism to the Democratic Party, so that is not a great way to start your career. He worked with Ohio Governor Dick Celeste before that, and while Governor Celeste actually wasn't that bad, he instituted the Department of Developmental Disabilities and did a few other liberal things. He was one of the last governors of Ohio to really be liberal in any meaningful sense. Not to say that he was sort of a doctrinaire liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but after he left office, Celeste joined the Council of Foreign Relations, which is a neoconservative think tank. So if you're wondering what Michael Bennet's foreign policy might look like, that could be a hint. When he was appointed to the Senate, he was appointed by Colorado Governor Bill Ritter. Ritter is one of the more interesting people on this list. He was economically liberal but socially conservative. meaning that he is effectively exactly the kind of Democrat that the party has been trying to purge itself of for a while now. Ritter, there are rumors that he was more or less forced out of the party by the powers that be, and then he came up with a feeble excuse that he had family issues to look after. He never ran for re-election. That's actually how Hickenlooper got into the governor's mansion. But Ritter also had a vacant Senate seat to fill, and there are rumors that he was pressured by the party powers that be to appoint Bennet, which gives you an indication that Bennet is considered safe by the Rahm Emanuels of the world and Barack Obama's. John Hickenlooper, the Colorado governor, who so famously drank fracking fluid in front of the Senate, thus short-selling his credentials as both a geologist and his dignity as a United States senator all in one go, without a trace of shame. To say that John Hickenlooper is a neoliberal is the most obvious statement one can make. He is also a friend and associate of Barack Obama. Barack Obama may very well have been the person pulling the strings with Governor Ritter to get him appointed to the Senate, because he knew that Bennet would be a reliable ally. And although there are people who want to defend Obama and his legacy, I think that they're prisoners of the moment, and they're just looking at Trump and not realizing that if you look at Obama in his own right, he really was a failure. He had no real lasting achievements outside of the ACA, despite coming into office with a supermajority, and a lot of that is most likely self-sabotage. He did not want to fundamentally change anything. He made permanent the Bush tax cuts. All of the troops are still in Iraq and Afghanistan. We expanded to some other wars. So don't kid yourself, Obama is a neoliberal, and a close association with Obama is actually a very bad sign if you're trying to gauge someone's ideological disposition. While he was still the superintendent in Denver, Michael Bennet got involved in the 2008 primary. Early on in the cycle, before most other people, he endorsed Barack Obama. Of course, Obama made an improbable run and overcame Hillary Clinton, who had the backing of most of the party at that time. And Bennet, by choosing the right horse, ingratiated himself with Obama, and they became friends. I have to imagine that because he was not a super senior or high-profile guy at the time, that there were intermediaries involved with creating this relationship between Bennet and Obama, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that the intermediary was his father, Douglas J. Bennet. At any rate, Obama was impressed by Bennet, who worked pretty hard on his behalf by all accounts, and Bennet was one of the people on the short list to become Secretary of Education. However, Obama ended up going with Arne Duncan instead. But he didn't forget about his good friend from Colorado. When Obama appointed Ken Salazar from the Senate to serve in his administration, this created an opening in the Senate, and this is when Governor Ritter got to appoint a replacement. It seems that Obama asked him to appoint Michael Bennet as a reward for not being Secretary of Education and as a payback for helping with his campaign. So Bennet was appointed to fill the seat in 2009. In the 2010 midterms, when Democrats across the country got slaughtered, Bennet was actually able to hold on in a state that at that time was not clearly a blue state yet, although it was already beginning to trend that way. But to do this, and this shows his electoral weakness to some extent, he had to outspend his primary challenger 7-1, which is an insane amount. And during the general election, he also had to drop a lot of cash. As I've mentioned before, the 2010 midterm was the first election to be under the new ruling of Citizens United, so campaign spending became unlimited and the numbers blew up overnight. So Bennet and his opponent were throwing money at this race like crazy. Bennet managed to win despite having not been very established in his office, and despite the fact that appointees generally don't fare all that well in elections. In 2014, Bennet was secure enough in his seat and well entrenched enough with the party leadership that he actually headed the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, or whatever it's called. It might actually be the DSCC. I actually don't know. I think it's DSCC. I probably just made a typo, which I'll correct. My screen right now says DSCS, but by the time you see it, you'll just think I'm making that up, because I'll use the magic of text editing to fix it. Anyway, he headed this in 2014. The Democrats, of course, got the shit kicked out of them that year, so I'm not sure if that, is really the best endorsement of Bennett's political abilities or ability to lead a party. But from what I remember, the Democrats in the Senate did better than the Democrats in the House, so make of that what you will. After 10 years of being in the Senate, I think that we can safely gauge what kind of a senator Michael Bennet is. There is a sort of shift moment with Michael Bennet that is a little hard to explain. In 2009, when he was first appointed, so he's someone who didn't get elected. He was about to face re-election after maybe a year in office. But early on, when Obama was actually trying to do things, Michael Bennet came out as a warrior for all of Obama's initiatives, and he fought boldly at a time when he and many other Democrats thought that swing state Democrats would be totally massacred if they backed anything remotely liberal, and they were being told by their consultants that they needed to be centrist. But Michael Bennet was solidly liberal for that first term, or that first section of a term, that first year. In 2009, Michael Bennet was actually sort of aggressive. He co-sponsored the DREAM Act in September 2009, and this is still something that he likes to talk about all the time. He was a big supporter of the ACA, and he also backed the Solar Manufacturing Jobs Creation Act, the thing that Obama got criticized for quite a bit by Rush Limbaugh for supposedly giving money to some company that he was friendly with. So early on, Bennet was fairly aggressive, because my thought is he was under the impression that he was pretty much doomed no matter what he did, so he just went balls to the wall and, voted for fun. But then once he got reelected, he became serious. And by serious, I mean he no longer wanted to do anything that would be productive or interesting. So then he became the stereotypical corporate Democrat. And it's also weird with his career because that time between 2010 and 2016, it's very hard to find prominent information about what Bennet was up to. But then once Trump comes into office, Bennet reemerges because now he's thinking, hey, if Trump can become president, so can I. I was born into a political family. It is my birthright. So one of the things he was famous for before Trump got elected is that he's one of the few Democrats who supported the Keystone XL pipeline throughout its entire life. Every time it's come up for a vote, Michael Bennet has been reliably for it. And for whatever reason, he has never taken flack for that, despite living in a state that is very big on conservation and nature. In 2017, in perhaps his most shameful moment of all, Michael Bennet co-sponsored the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, which would have made it a federal crime to boycott Israeli products as a way to protest the Israeli government's treatment of Palestine. So effectively, Michael Bennet took a strong stance against free speech and a strong stance in favor of Israel's apartheid government. So, yeah, really A+ for that. And he has also done a lot of symbolic bullshit in the Trump years. He's written a lot of letters, or signed them at least, and petitions to Trump over various issues and abuses, such as the children in cages, whatever. But when it comes to actually substantive things that would actually make a difference in people's lives, or fighting for things that are material in any way, Michael Bennet has not done anything during his time in the Senate. For me, and I suspect for you as well, one of the most important things about any candidate, something that could get you to vote for someone even if you have some reservations about their person, is their platform. Does this person have a comprehensive answer for the challenges that face us as a society? Do they have a vision for the future that is compelling? In the case of Michael Bennet, the answer is a resounding hell no. He does not have any vision, really. He is a co-sponsor of Medicare X, a public option plan that he developed in conjunction with Tim Kaine. This is a gradualist model which argues that by implementing a public option, this will create a bridge to Medicare for all, eventually. This was an argument that some of the Democrats against single-payer trotted out as early as 2008. I believe Obama actually said this during one of the primary debates with Hillary Clinton, who, believe it or not, in 2008 was for single-payer. And this is just a reheated argument from the past. The time has passed for the public option. The public is in support of Medicare for all, and that is clearly the way to go if 70% of the Democratic Party supports it. And then even a majority of all Americans and a majority of Republicans support it. It's really stupid not to just run on that. But, of course, Michael Bennet and Tim Kaine are political geniuses. Remember how Tim Kaine won the election for Hillary? Michael Bennet wants to mandate paper ballots to ensure the sanctity of our elections. I agree with this wholeheartedly, but he doesn't deserve that much credit because about half of the other Democrats also want to do this, and it's not really that genius of a move. It's pretty obvious that you need a paper trail to ensure that elections are on the up and up. So I think that this is more of a common sense thing. I'll give him credit for being on the right side of it, but again, this isn't something that turns out the voters. He wants to keep the wall that Donald Trump is building as part of a comprehensive immigration package. Now, since he is running as a centrist, this actually makes a lot of sense in the context of his messaging, and I guess this could help him appeal to Trump voters in theory, although the thing that a lot of centrists never get through their thick skulls is that if you run as a diet Republican, Republicans are just going to opt for the real Republican, and then Democrats are going to stay home. Also, keeping the wall is one of these like dumbass centrist plots to find the middle ground, when in reality the wall is a complete waste of money that will not do anything to curb illegal immigration. Almost all illegal immigration occurs at border crossings. The wall is a big barrier in the middle of the desert. It's not going to make much difference, and it's basically just a big-ass symbol and a waste of money. He wants to legalize marijuana, so do 18 other Democrats. Get in line. I guess he deserves some credit for being a Colorado politician who was in favor of this, unlike Hickenlooper. He wants to boost military spending and keep the troops deployed. So basically, he is running on an openly neoliberal foreign policy. This is something that you would hear from someone like Hillary Clinton or any given Republican. This is not great. Not that it's all that unusual for the Democratic Party right now, unfortunately, but this is clearly not cool. And because he's a centrist who believes in compromising before you get to the negotiating table, he, like Hillary Clinton in 2016, thinks we need to raise the minimum wage, but not too much. How about $12? You say $15 would enable you to live comfortably, or at least get by? I'll give you 12. You know, let's not make things too good for workers. Let's not make sure that they are able to make a living and pay the rent by working a full-time job. Let's just make it a little bit more plausible, but not quite get them to where they need to be. That's what centrism will do for you. Okay? If you're like me, and you're firmly on the left, and you look at some centrists and see how crappy their policies are, and wonder, why are these policies so crappy? There's a simple answer. Centrists are almost entirely composed of corporate whores who owe their allegiance to corporations. And Michael Bennet is a dedicated corporate hooker. Since 2015, Bennet has relied on large individual donors for 61% of his money. If you look at more candidates who are more for the people, they tend to get a larger number of smaller donors, people who are not wealthy enough to donate the individual maximum of $2,800. So Bennet does well with wealthy people who think that things are great and that Obama was the best president ever. He gets the lion's share of his money from securities and investments, lawyers, and law firms. On the surface, it doesn't sound that bad, but then I looked into who these people are. One of his major donors is Blackstone Group. They are an ultra-corporate not lobbying firm, but a law firm. Aiken Gump et al. Donated around $80,000 to Michael Bennet, and they are the most profitable lobbying firm in America, so clearly they are champions of the people. And he is also supported by Vote Sane PAC. This is a bipartisan pro-establishment group which basically cheerleads the establishment figures from both parties in a way that even Nate Silver would find to be a little too much. So, to put it to you bluntly, Michael Bennet is the quintessential corporate Democrat. If one of your friends asked you what a corporate Democrat is, just show them a picture of Mr. Mackey. The 2020 Democratic primary field is notoriously crowded, and Michael Bennet is running as a centrist, which means that he's basically in the most crowded part of a crowded field. There are far fewer progressives. He is running in the most crowded part of the party, although I think he might be somewhat to the right of a lot of the other centrists. So, if anything, I guess he's trying to carve out a little bit of a space, but the differences between, say, Bennet and Hickenlooper and Klobuchar and Delaney and Buttigieg are very small when you get down to the details. And the problem with Bennet is that he's just not very charismatic. So he doesn't stand out at all. He's trying to play it in a way that I think is actually low-key smart. And he's just trying to play it as the nice guy. He doesn't attack anyone. He says nothing unpleasant about anyone. He always disagrees respectfully. And unlike some of the other people who are trying a similar thing, he doesn't have a lot of dirt personally. So unlike Buttigieg, he does not have the dirt of firing the black police chief. Unlike Klobuchar, he hasn't abused any staffers. So he can run as a nice guy, and for the most part, by all accounts, actually Michael Bennet is a nice guy. I mean, his politics are terrible, but he doesn't have any enemies that I'm aware of. No one has ever really had a personal beef with the guy. So he's got that going for him, which means that he can stick around, and he has not a lot of collapse potential, even if his ceiling is rather low. As I will argue later, I think that he is running a vice presidential campaign, and that his campaign is way more plausible than you might think at this juncture in the video. The main obstacle to his rise, however, is Amy Klobuchar. They're essentially doing the same thing, and like I said, Michael Bennet is way more believable as the nice guy than someone who literally throws binders at people, eats her salad with a fork to prove a point, and sends emails in someone's name talking about how stupid and worthless they are. So anyway, he's a lot more legit than Klobuchar as the nice guy candidate, but right now the Democratic Party is super big on identity, and if they're looking for an alternative to the mainstream centrist, the Harrises, Bidens, or whatever, then Klobuchar will be the default rather than Bennet. So unless another Klobuchar scandal breaks and she drops out, Bennet doesn't have a clear path to gain any kind of name recognition outside of his peers in the primary field and the Senate. He has done this by being less aggressive and more pleasant than Hickenlooper or Delaney, although substantively there's not a hell of a lot of difference between them. If anything, he might be less substantive than, say, Delaney. But he is not aggressive or unpleasant. I mean, he's boring, but you don't necessarily want to punch him. You don't want to boo him off the stage. You're not looking up memes of him afterwards. You forget that he was there. His strategy, though, is essentially identical to his old boss, John Hickenlooper, He's running ads in Iowa against Medicare for All, raising the specter of people being kicked off of their private insurance. So he's using Republican talking points and saying the same things that the other centrists are saying. There's nothing special about his campaign. His strategy is really weak, and I think he's intentionally trying not to ruffle any feathers. However, he is trying to pretend, and it's possible he just doesn't understand politics. Maybe he's completely honest, but just really dumb, that he is pinning all of his hopes on Iowa. He's putting all of his resources, which are rather limited, into Iowa. He thinks that he'll do really well in Iowa, and then people will notice what a great centrist he is and what a great alternative to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. I think that the strategy is completely ridiculous, but that's what he's going to do. He should drop out, but he's not. So, why is it that Michael Bennet has absolutely no chance of being the party's nominee. He only has a handful of strengths. One of those strengths is that he has one of the highest net worths of anyone in the race at $15 million. That is the official figure from some article I read. Like I said, I think it's actually fourth because I'm pretty sure Andrew Yang has $20 or $30 million, something like that. And he has some corporate friends who are very favorable to him, but so far have not been willing to give him much money because they don't see him as someone who has a lot of juice. He has a weak, uninspiring platform that is out of touch with the times. We already looked at that. He has no apparent strategy for winning the primary. Right now, with Klobuchar in the race, he has no way even onto the debate stage. And even if he were to be on the stage in her place, I don't think that people would look at him and see a future president. So there's not really much going for him. He claims that debates are not his path to the nomination, that he's going to just win Iowa and then magically take off from there. That's ridiculous. If you don't have infrastructure in place in California and the other states, you have no chance of people just randomly taking up your cause, which is part of why I think he's doing something else. He has zero charisma. Michael Bennet, as I've said, is the human version of Mr. Mackey. Now, Mr. Mackey from South Park, pretty nice guy, I guess, but no charisma. The kids don't take him seriously. He's not a good speaker. He does not command respect. He is a school counselor who says, "Mmkay." That is Michael Bennet. I mean, Mr. Mackey is literally the caricatured version of Michael Bennet, although in Michael Bennett's defense, he does have better hair than Mr. Mackey. So, I'm being fair here, okay? He has no memorable positions. So even if his policies were centrist, they're not distinctive at all. What is it about Michael Bennett's candidacy that is distinctive? I guess he is one of the more plausible nice guys. But that strategy generally doesn't work. And again, he's not the only person doing that. Pete Buttigieg tried to play hall monitor in the last debate. Amy Klobuchar calls herself the senator next door. Both of them are doing a lot better than Bennet. He has no attacks because that's not what he does. He tries to play the nice guy, so he can't attack. He can't do any takedowns. And he has no zingers because, again, he lacks charisma and he has not much wit. Even someone with zero charisma like Julian Castro, who can't attack effectively, can still make you remember the fact that he was present at the debate. John Delaney has no charisma, but you remember he was present at the debate. I can't right offhand remember a single word that Michael Bennet said in the first 2 rounds of debates. Not a single sentence. Because he said nothing that was important or memorable. Another thing he has going against him is that it's very easy for people to do health scares about candidates. And despite the fact that he's relatively young at 54 or 55, he was recently treated for prostate cancer. Sure, the rate of survival is super high, but if you're looking at someone who has low name recognition and you're looking for a quick reason to dismiss someone as your new go-to, that might be enough to persuade people to go to somebody else. And that seems like a pretty small thing, and it is. But, again, Michael Bennet has not much going for him otherwise, and his margin of error for winning over new supporters is very low. His only possible victory scenario is if there's a brokered convention and they're on the 38th round of voting, everybody's exhausted, and then they realize that there's one person that all of them can agree is not a complete asshole. They don't necessarily love him, but he's not an asshole. So let's put him up. Michael Bennet for president. Hooray. That's his only path. So, if we want to talk about candidates who actually matter for a second, let's talk about Elizabeth Warren. Right now, she has momentum on her side. The party is beginning to back her. She already has a lot of backers in the media. So it's not implausible that she ends up winning the nomination. The question then becomes, who does she pick as her VP? One of my friends earlier, I discussed this idea with him. He said that Pete Buttigieg was the obvious choice for her. He's obviously extremely good at raising corporate money. And there are other plausible people as well. Klobuchar, if they want to do an all-women ticket. She could do Booker. She could choose someone who's also progressive. She could choose Beto and try to gain inroads in Texas. There's a lot of things she could do, I guess. But I think if she wins the nomination, her choice will be Michael Bennet. And here are my reasons for thinking that. Warren is increasingly aligning herself with Hillary's old advisors. These advisors are kind of like the German generals of World War II, who, despite losing the war, managed to convince everyone that they were in fact unparalleled military geniuses who knew everything there was to know about defeating the Soviet Union despite the fact that they didn't do it. And that's basically the case with Robbie Mook and the Mook Mafia. They're convinced, and they have managed to convince most of their elite friends, that Hillary's strategy was basically flawless, or at least close to it, and that they should just reproduce that strategy, but maybe upgrade the candidates a bit. So, if they're giving advice to Warren and she's taking them seriously, she has less than great instincts when it comes to politicking, so she definitely is taking these people seriously. She will see that Michael Bennet is a slight upgrade of Tim Kaine, but fundamentally the same. Just as if she runs her campaign the way that her advisors want her to run it, she will basically be Hillary Clinton, but with higher upsides and lower downsides. So, if we run that perfect campaign back, but with better candidates, there's no way we can lose. Warren and Bennet literally are improved versions of Hillary and Kaine. Bennet and Tim Kaine, as I've shown, are very close with one another. Ideologically, they're inseparable. They are the co-sponsors of Medicare X, as I mentioned earlier. So the links there are enormous. And Warren also has this sort of fantasy of being the first female president and carrying over that kind of emotionality that Hillary had from her hardcore supporters. So by choosing someone who is basically a thinner version of Tim Kaine, she basically is just doing an upgrade of the old trick that got college-educated white women of a certain age so excited 4 years ago. And we know that Warren and Bennet are on pretty good terms. They have co-sponsored a number of bills and resolutions together, and they have been pretty close in the Trump era. And as I said, Bennet does his best to get along with everybody, and that includes Elizabeth Warren, who also is not a hard person to get along with, generally speaking. I don't know if they're necessarily best friends, but they're pretty close to it. So if we think about it beyond just imitating Hillary's strategy, Bennet would also be on the short list regardless. Even if Warren was not thinking of doing the Hillary revision run, he still makes some sense. He's from a different region of the country. He has a different ideology, at least in theory. Warren is still labeled as a progressive, although I would challenge that label a bit. He's non-controversial. I mean, there's nothing interesting about Bennet. There are no scandals that I'm aware of. He's friendly with the Obama and Clinton factions because he's worked with both of them at various times. And if you look at the biases of the elite DC establishment, Bennet is from a storied family that goes way back in DC history. He's an Ivy Leaguer, and he just fits the bill for them. So, if I had to put money, assuming Warren wins the nomination, which I think is actually a bigger variable than who she'd pick as a VP, if she wins the nomination, I would say there's a solid 50% chance that Michael Bennet is her pick. And based on the general shittiness and lack of desire to win that his campaign is demonstrating, I can't help but think that Michael Bennet is running for Elizabeth Warren's running mate. So those are my thoughts on Michael Bennet. Hopefully, outside of my debate videos, I will never have to speak of him again. The next time we get a Bennet running for office, I hope that they have the decency to spell their name correctly with 2 T's.